Talofalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Swiswiki. Coming up,
some of the challenges that I did face was the duration of the term. It's only 12 months.
There's a new ulu or head of state for Tokelau. Also,
we are here for each other, we support each other, and these are the things that sadly each individual countries suffer on their own.
The head of PIF meets with regional media, and Tonga holds its National Development Summit. Whakaofos e Sera Fofo Tuisano is Tokelau's new ulu o Tokelau or head of state. His inauguration took place on Whakaofo, the host atoll for the first session of Parliament or General Whono for the year. Our Tokelau correspondent, Elena Basilio, who is Nukunono's environment officer, is on Whakaofo for the inauguration.
I'd say there was more than 100 people who attended, and this was the Hakanohonga, which is literally translated into the seating, and it was just the transfer of the ownership. So from Nukunono's Pitatavite to Whakao's Haipule Esera Tuisano.
Elena spoke to former Ulo Tokelau, Nukunono Faipule, and now Health and Finance Minister, Alapati Tavite, after he handed over the role. She started off by asking him about his reflections following his year in the role.
Yeah, if I think back of the time I was carrying the position as the Ulu of Tokelau, 2024, probably the first thing that comes to mind was the opportunity to meet the leaders of supporting government, New Zealand, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the ministers in the cabinets. It was a highlight as I had the opportunity to discuss with them and to share with them some of the challenges and the areas that we would like New Zealand to continue and support Tokelau with, not only financially but also technically. And I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity. And before the end of my term, we were able to get some of those assistance. Not only the additional funding that was provided for the annual budget for Tokelau, we have an extra $1 million on top of it, and also some other financial contributions towards education, health, and also our energy, solar energy. New Zealand continued to support us, and not only that financial, but also other technical support. There will be more teams visiting Tokelau soon in the next few months that will look into opportunities that Tokelau could develop further in terms of economic development and also the natural resources, how we can use those natural resources to get more benefits out of it. I also had the opportunity to meet probably all or most of the leaders of the Pacific. We had attended the Pacific Forum in Tonga in the middle of last year, and that was a great opportunity to build the network, to share the similarities and the challenges that we face, and also the examples of each of the countries that could help us, to overcome some of those challenges. And from there, we continue to have some correspondence in between how can they assist us in some of those common issues. And that was a highlight. Also, last year I had an opportunity to visit Niue. Why I was encouraged to visit Niue is Tokelau was looking into having another referendum. So the kind of self-governance that Niue is currently operating in, we were looking at what are the benefits that Niue is having that as being a self-governance kind of government. So some of the examples that we've learned from there, that could be an opportunity to share with the people of Tokelau if they would like to have a change, in the government that we have at the moment. So I think those are some of the highlights that I can think of on top of my head at the moment. But there were so many opportunities personally. I have managed to build my confidence, in facing the leaders, at that level. Thank you.
Do you want to mention any challenges or
Yeah. Well, some of the challenges that I did face was the duration of the term. As you may have learned, uh, having the ownership is only 12 months. And after building this relationship with the leaders around the Pacific and New Zealand, and by the time you get familiarize yourself with these people, your term will be over. You won't be able to continue that relationship. And also the things that you have been trying to develop during your term within the government, it's very hard now, as you have passed the role to somebody else. So I think having only 12 months to operate as the Ulu Tokelau, it may not be enough to do something. Yeah.
So what are your hopes going forward?
Yeah, now I will hope to work closely with the new Ulu, to share with him my inspirations, so that he can continue to the things that I see that we need to continue on developing. Hopefully he can recognize it and take it as some of the priorities. And I think that's what I would like to hopefully to work with. Otherwise, the things that I was trying to do in the last 12 months may just be going to zero, to nothing. So I hope we will have a closer relationship with the new Ulu for this year.
Tokelau is a non-self-governing territory of New Zealand and will celebrate the 100th anniversary of its relationship with New Zealand next year. Its people are New Zealand citizens and have voted against becoming self-governing and free association twice, in 2006 and another the year after. While a community consultation is underway in Tokelau to explore a potential third referendum on its political status, an anthropologist hopes there won't be any external interference. Judith Huntsman is an honorary professorial research fellow at the University of Auckland and is a world expert on the history and anthropology of Tokelau. She is the co-author of Tokelau, A History of Ethnography, and The Future of Tokelau, Decolonizing Agendas. Talofa lava, Judith. First of all, tell me about your research on Tokelau. You spent quite a bit of time there, didn't you?
I certainly did. In between 1967 and 1997, I spent 5 years in Tokelau.
During those times, how would you describe the relationship between New Zealand and Tokelau?
Well, it varied. And continued to vary thereafter. New Zealand just found Tokelau a nuisance, really, and they were embarrassed by Tokelau and the fact that they had a colony because they wanted to be good members of the global community, and this particularly when the Ministry of Foreign Affairs became the people who were involved with Tokelau. And it was somewhat aggravating, shall we say, to hear all these pompous people speaking about, we must have Tokelau independent or self-governing in association with New Zealand, like the Cook Islands and Niue, because they wanted to look good in the eyes of the UN. And after the Second World War, there was this great push for decolonization that created the Committee of 24 in the UN, who oversaw the decolonization of all kinds of places, who really did want to be decolonized. But Tokelau was not up for that, really. They felt that New Zealand was taking reasonable care of them, and that why should they, do anything else? And that is what happened, of course, when they had two referendum, one after another, and they both, rejected the proposal of New Zealand.
Well, yeah, in the lead up to Tokelau's first referendum, what sparked the idea amongst the locals for independence or self-determination?
Nothing sparked it. It was New Zealand that was pushing it.
Right. Was there ever a bad breakdown in relationship between New Zealand and Tokelau, which we've seen with New Zealand and Samoa in the past?
No, it's a very different situation. Tokelau is far away, has a very, and continues to have a very vibrant and workable way of living. Right. And it's changed over time, but it's changed more or less in their direction. They've got more money. They've got various things that they want. And part of it, of course, is because these are enticements for them to change their political status.
And what do you think the likely outcome would be if this third referendum were to go ahead?
Well, I hope, and I have spoken to two people who are very keen to see it go ahead, not because they just want to see a situation in which the status of Tokelau is resolved, and it comes down to, do they want to integrate with New Zealand, or do they want self-government in self-government in free association? Because the whole idea of becoming completely independent would be nonsense. Why
would it be nonsense?
Well, the Tokelau is sitting there in the middle of the Pacific, with great distance between them and their closest neighbors, and it has a small population. There are 1,500 people in Tokelau, and there are 8,000 Tokelauans in New Zealand.
Judah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
What I hope is that if this goes ahead, that it goes ahead with what Tokelau wants, not what New Zealand and the UN want.
The Pacific Islands Forum Secretary General has affirmed that the US funding pledges made by the last administration are still on hold in his first regional press briefing of the year. Baron Wanga reflected on his time in Marshall Islands for Nuclear Remembrance Day, updated everyone on the Pacific's involvement in the New Caledonia crisis. Mr. Wanga also praised Japan's contribution to the Pacific Resilience Facility, flagged regional banking issues, and briefly commented on Bougainville's push for independence. Lydia Lewis has more.
The Biden administration pledged to work with Congress to provide $200 million more in funding for projects in the region back in 2023, funding the Pacific has not yet seen.
Joe Biden's pledges to the Pacific, it's clear to us all that those are all on hold. Every aid to foreign aid and have been suspended. We would like to have a real good rapport between us and the U.S. new administration. We're trying our utmost best to sit down with the current administration.
When asked whether the U.S. pulling back on its climate stance will threaten its position in the forum itself, this was his response.
Well, U.S. policy on climate change is obvious. We are well aware of their policy, but at the end of the day, it's totally up to the U.S., working with the region and individual nations on a bilateral level.
The climate crisis has been dubbed the single greatest threat facing the Pacific by Pacific leaders. Deputy Secretary General Desna Salofa says it's an expectation that partners of the Pacific align with regional priorities.
The United States is a valued dialogue partner of the forum, and they have been since 1989. The Secretariat will continue its work in terms of furthering our discussions to ensure that our collaboration will continue with the United States, the U.S. government. So our expectation again is that all our development partners, all our forum dialogue partners will remain and will continue to engage with the Pacific in a way that aligns with our regional priorities.
Baron Wanga says he's pleased to see some areas of US cooperation. The $5.8 million pledged to help set up the Pacific Resilience Facility, a climate fund for climate vulnerable nations to build seawalls and the likes, is still on the table, and he's working on a time to sit down with the Trump administration. On the issue of New Caledonia, a French territory which is a Pacific Islands Forum member, Baron Wanga says its political situation remains one of the Pacific family's top priorities.
So the dynamics is starting to shift and change. We hope it is for the better for the New Caledonians, and certainly we'll be working hard to making sure that our reporting and observing of the situation is kept up to date.
The Prime Ministers of Tonga and Fiji headed a fact-finding mission to the French territory in response to the former New Caledonia President's calls for Pacific input late last year. Since then, both Tonga and New Caledonia have had leadership changes, and France has sent a high-level minister to progress its own talks.
With regards to the report, former Prime Minister Savoleni was actively involved in that as the chair. We'll be seeking collaboration and his involvement as well.
On the issue of Bougainville's independence, Mr Wanga was asked what the Forum is doing to prepare for an independent state of Bougainville in the Pacific, and what engagement, if any, has been had with the ABG and the PNG government. This was his response.
There's nothing formal received or discussed at this time, but whatever happens, I think the issue would have to be decided by our leaders later on this year. But we're keeping a close watch on what the developments are.
Nuclear issues were also discussed. The Secretary-General attended Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day in Marshall Islands earlier this month. The country's President, Hilda Heine, says her people continue to face the impacts of US nuclear weapons testing 7 decades after the last bomb was detonated. Mr Wanga says he backs a call for compensation from the US for nuclear survivors.
We are here for each other, we support each other, and these are the things that sadly each individual countries suffer on their own. And I think it's about time that everyone rise above themselves now and we stand in solidarity with our Marshallese family.
He says he was pleased to have witnessed the Marshall Islands signing of the Rarotonga Treaty, one he says the Pacific takes seriously, and asks all the Pacific's partners to take it seriously too.
The Tonga government of Aisake Eke, formed at the end of last year, is holding its first National Development Summit in Nuku'alofa. The summit is being held over 4 days, and our correspondent in Tonga, Galafi Moala, who attended the opening, told Don Wiseman what it is aimed at achieving.
It's simply a strategic development planning, which it goes back 60 years ago. 1965 was when they started. It was, one of the 5-year strategic planning. This year it's the 60th year of it. The only thing was that back in 2015 was they decided instead of 5 years strategic planning, they're going to have 10 years. And so from 2015 to this year, this is the end of the 10th year strategic planning. So it was time to have a conference and have a new one, develop another plan. And that's why this conference is all about.
And specifically, they'll be looking at?
Well, they're looking at national development and things like economic development, education, infrastructure. The issue, of course, of the climate change is a big issue today, say, compared with back in 1995. And so that's a big issue they're going to look at. The problems we're encountering with drug and crime, and then how we're going to bring development into the public sector, and especially the communities of the outer island.
There's a massive shortage of money in Tonga to do much of this. So have they involved foreign investors in this specifically?
Yes. Actually, they're the what they call the development partners, which are the governments. They are the high commissioners, the ambassadors of the foreign governments that are in Tonga, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and China. They were the prominent ones that were there today. And it was mentioned in the Prime Minister's speech that without the help and the assistance of these governments, there wouldn't have been a development plan. And I think it started all the way back 60 years ago. And then they've been involved in the latter years with the planning that's taking place. I think for me, one of the encouraging things that I've seen, and I've always been critical of the fact that they have planning. Then when they hatch a new plan, they don't tell you what happened in the past 5 or 10 years. But today, it was very encouraging that the whole sessions that are going to be given to reporting how successful or not the past 10-year plan has been, and what needs to be learned, what was good and successful, and what was not. And so that's something very needful. And I was encouraged and glad that they are doing the planning, and then they are evaluating whether it worked or not before they go on to hatch another plan.
Now, in terms of foreign support, this is coming at a time that much of the world, and most of the nations that provide most of the aid, are cutting back in some cases drastically.
Yes, definitely, and I think this is why there was a need appropriately for a strategic planning session going on where it involves the development partner. You'll be able to plan according to the resources that's available for you. And so I think they have that very much in mind as all these different foreign partners are involved. It's interesting that there was no representation there that I noticed this morning from the Americans. They had the Australians, the UK, New Zealand, and Japan and China, but I didn't notice any representation there from the High Commissioner, the American Embassy.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā sui fua.